And call us to order. Welcome everyone to the Transportation Commission meeting on Monday, January 13th. And I'm calling this meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. Jennifer, could you please do the roll call?
Nick. Oh, Nick's not here. Sorry. Skylar.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
Brett.
Here.
Brooke.
Here.
All right.
Okay, with that, we'll move to approval of the agenda. I'm seeking a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the agenda? There's no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, we'll move to brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and council liaisons. This is the time for brief announcements from city staff, commissioners, and council member liaisons, although I understand we don't have one this evening. Are there any announcements from staff?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So the first one is we are putting the finishing touches on a Caltrans Sustainable Communities grant for updating the active transportation plan. This will be evolving the current Beyond Platinum Bicycle Action Plan to update it for current grant opportunities and look at the needs of the community. We're also looking at all modes of active transportation: bicycling, walking, electric devices, scooters, and other devices that might be coming on board in the near future. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the Safe Roads to School program will be doing the Cooler Bear Pedal in February. This is a program that is really aimed at encouraging elementary school students to get out and ride their bikes to school in February, which is normally our coldest month of the year.
Any other announcements from staff? Are there any announcements from commissioners?
A couple quick updates. First on the YOLO TD, couple YOLO TD items. Firstly, the YOLO Bus Express bus expansion for the lines between Davis and downtown Sacramento will be starting a week from tomorrow, January 21st. So that, as a recap, is expanding Route 43, which is East Davis, and then Route 230, which is West Davis, from 1 round trip to 3 round trips every day. And then also restoring Route 44, the South Davis Express line, with 3 round trips. And also some of the stops on the 43 and the 230 are being consolidated as part of that as well. And there also will be expanded span of service on some of the local services in West Sacramento also. So that's something to take advantage of any of you who are in that area. Also an update on the Woodland Transit Center. I updated last week that they were voting on potentially moving the transit center to Costco as a temporary option due to some political difficulties that the proposed location in downtown Woodland at 2nd and Court Streets had run into. The board did vote down that Costco option, and now they're looking at both that original downtown Woodland location as an alternative, as well as a proposed affordable housing redevelopment site. It's called Yolano Donnelly, which is like just east of downtown Woodland on the other side of Main Street. The next meeting for the CAC is on March 3rd, so I'll follow up with more on that at the next meeting. And also one other item regarding my day job at Caltrans. We're working on a statewide transit policy, and we're engaging in some outreach on that this month with stakeholders on like an outline that we have for that. And there is a webinar for stakeholders in Northern California coming up this Thursday at 9 a.m. For Davis, I believe it was Jeff Flynn from Unitrans, as well as the dispatch email for Davis Community Transit. We're on the contact list for that and got invites, but if other staff or commissioners are interested in attending that, we can arrange to get you that invitation. We definitely were looking to engage with transit, the community stakeholders and advocates, as well as just the transit agencies and local governments. So those are my updates.
Great, thank you, Andy. Are there any other commissioner announcements?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief as I want to respect everyone's time here. I got back from a 3-week trip to sort of northwestern Europe. Every single city that I visited was one which was considerably more
cycle and transit oriented than probably any city west of the Mississippi River. But I would say just few key points that I thought were interesting enough to share. One, there is actually such a thing as, I didn't know it was possible, as too much bike infrastructure. What I mean is, there's one city I visited, Utrecht in the Netherlands, which has such excellent bicycle infrastructure that completely neglected public transit. In fact, there was basically no way to get anywhere within the city center, sort of a few mile max, without a bicycle, which was interesting to see. So that was one sort of funny takeaway, that bikes can be taken for granted the way we take cars for granted here. Another was that the city of Ghent in Belgium, which I had visited several times before, had actually added a lot of infrastructure and done a lot of major positive changes just in the last 10 years or so. So I could palpably see how much a community could benefit from substantial changes to their infrastructure and their policies. Specifically, a substantial portion of the historical city center was blocked off from cars almost entirely. That still allowed commercial vehicles in and out, as they would need to. But it really took a city that had a solid, I guess, biking culture into one that had a dominant one, and made the city more walkable. I think it also, there could be other matters at hand, but I think it also made the downtown more economically vibrant. Just in general, Ghent appeared to be significantly more affluent than it had in previous visits, and that's kind of contrary to what I've seen in similar sized cities in the US. Ghent is about 250,000 or so people within the city. It's harder to gauge metropolitan areas there because the countries are so much more densely populated that the difference between suburb and metropolitan area is blurred. But in any case, I thought I would share those things and just sort of say I think the potential is there to expand upon some of the work the city has done recently at making our downtown maybe less car focused, and that there are pretty clear benefits available to our community if we do that.
Great, thank you, Skylar. Anyone else?
Well, I will actually follow then. Thank you so much, Mr. Skelton Campbell, to share that. And I will share a version of this. First of all, Utrecht is actually, it's interesting you made your comments. It is the central hub of the rail system in the Netherlands. Like everything runs through there. So sorry, but thank you. So Utrecht is a central hub where all the trains go through. So getting in and out is not hard, but within the city, everybody just walks and takes the bike. I just dropped my parents off, who visited from the Netherlands this morning, and they were here for a month, and I'll share real briefly a couple things that we did when they were here, that we used to do when I was still living there, that I see nobody else do here, just in that same spirit of what is possible to build on what we already have. We went to downtown by bike and had dinner. You never see groups of 4 or 5 families with bikes somewhere together. And it's so striking to see that not happening because it's all you see every single day, like in all these places. We also took my 9-year-old's friends for his birthday party to a downtown movie. For I think everybody but my kids, it was probably the first time they biked to downtown from where they lived. They loved it, it was great. It also was extremely unusual because everybody else was looking at us. Cars were super differential, much appreciated, unlike what you sometimes find by yourself as a cyclist. And it was great, but it was also a little jarring to see how unusual it is. And the experience made me think that in addition to the polar pedals, there's opportunities here to organize some bike encouragement by actually taking classes with kids from their schools and actually have them watch the movie as an activity. Like to really kind of build on and showcase what is possible because they loved it. They thought it was so exhilarating, they had a blast. And it was really so simple and yet so uncommon. So yeah, we have the bones. We're on the path as Groningen and Ghent and Utrecht once were. And what you've seen in your trip is what we've gone through, the city that I grew up in, same side of Davis, went through exactly this, like a downtown becoming car poor, like cars are allowed, when I was growing up there. And it was the exact same difference. It was like going from everybody went there by car to this place where in the summertime everybody gathered. The downtown was revitalized. And this was 20 years ago. So they made that decision then. Many other cities have, and that's what I think those of us who lived it, who visited, can see is possible. I think that's really going to be germane to all many of the discussions that we're having today and going forward in Davis. So I wasn't going to, but now I did.
Thank you. I really need to move up my plans for a European vacation, I can tell that. Okay, with that, unless there's anything else from commissioners, we'll move on to public comment. So I'm opening up the meeting for public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on matters which are not listed on the agenda. So if you're here for the climate action plan discussion, we'll be to that in a moment. So please hold your comments till that time. Speakers are limited to no more than 3 minutes. You'll be asked to speak here at the podium and to state your name for the record. Is there any public comment at this time? Okay, there is no public comment. We will move on to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar, non-controversial and can be approved with one motion. The only thing we have on the consent calendar tonight is our December 9th Transportation Commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second that.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, the next is our regular agenda items. These items will receive a presentation, then commissioners will have a chance to ask clarifying questions about the presentation and the staff report. Please hold all comments and discussion until after we hear public comment. Commissioners must be open to new ideas and listen to public comment. After that, we can discuss the item and provide our own comments. So with that, we'll move on to our agenda item.
Thank you. Carrie Lux, our Sustainability Program Manager for the City of Davis, is here to present on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And I'm going to hand it over to Carrie. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I know a number of you, but not everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I was the project manager for the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which was adopted by City Council in April of 2023. So we are currently in the phase of establishing the framework and strategies for implementing CAP actions. And I do want to say that this presentation is going to be somewhat of a general overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. We probably won't dive too deeply into too much of it, but we can certainly discuss anything that is of interest to you. So as I mentioned, I'll be calling the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan the CAP. Both the CAP and the environmental review, which was a negative declaration, was adopted on April 18th, 2023. It was kind of a special day because we had our Environmental Recognition Awards and Earth Day and the CAP adoption all at the same time. The goals that were directed by City Council were to come up with a plan that attains carbon neutrality by 2040. That is 5 years ahead of the current state goal of 2045. We were looking at cost-effective and measurable actions that we could undertake to attain that goal with a diversity, equity, and inclusion focus. Additionally, although the primary focus of the CAP is greenhouse gas reduction, we were also looking at addressing climate risk through adaptation actions and looking at the co-benefits. Excuse me, that's something stuck in my throat. That each action can afford to us. Before we started with our public outreach, we completed the vulnerability assessment and the greenhouse gas inventory that was current at that time. We did a regionally integrated greenhouse gas inventory with the other cities in Yolo County and Yolo County. And our baseline was 2016, which we're currently trying to update. We made a commitment in the CAP to do greenhouse gas inventories every 2 years. And although the 2016 baseline was appropriate at that moment, it doesn't address many of our significant actions in Davis, such as having Valley Clean Energy providing electricity, or some of our new developments that have a significant impact on our community greenhouse gas emissions. As I mentioned, a major focus of the CAP was to have robust community engagement. We were developing the CAP right in the middle of the pandemic. So we were on the verge of selecting the consultant. We had the interviews in February of 2020, and we're then moving forward into getting the consultant on board. And then, of course, we all went home and tried to work from home. So we didn't actually get our consultant on board until December of 2020, but we proceeded with virtual meetings and so the workshops, 2 online surveys, and then we had monthly Natural Resources Commission meetings with a number of other commissions, having sent liaisons to the Natural Resources Commission. So we had a pretty broad base of public input through the commission structure. We went to farmers markets. We felt very good about the breadth and depth of community input that we got during the process. And in some ways, having the meetings be virtual had some benefit because different people came to the meetings than you might have had for people that need to come downtown for a meeting. So the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion was a part of developing the CAP actions. We identified an environmental justice community strategy in the vulnerability assessment. We did specific outreach where they were to vulnerable and marginalized groups. And then the process of selecting the 28 actions that are currently in the CAP was that we had gotten all of this community input. We had 1,000 different ideas, literally 1,000 ideas, which we combined and assessed and winnowed down to 100. And then we put those 100 through an evaluation process to come up with the actions that were most effective for greenhouse gas reduction, were able to be controlled and managed by the City of Davis, and that would also potentially or alternatively have some climate risk elements. While we were doing that evaluation of those 100 actions, we applied double weight to the co-benefit of equity and inclusion. We had 6 different primary co-benefits that we had identified, and we wanted to make sure to elevate that. Then when we did publish the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, each sector and goal and action has equity considerations in the implementation roadmaps. I will say that the CAP is a planning document. It is not the final word on how we would do these actions, all of the steps we might take, the feasibility of everything, the cost of everything. We did analyze all of that, but each action still needs some work to make it fully implementable. So we did end up, as I said, with 28 actions. They are in 5 sectors, which is building, energy, and design. There's 8 actions. Transportation and land use has 11 actions. Water conservation and waste reduction has 1 action. And part of the reason for that is because the City of Davis has such a strong program of waste reduction and water conservation that we don't have too many actions that rise to the level of making a big difference because we're already so successful. And then the last 2 sections are climate action, adaptation, and carbon removal. And you can see the various goals in in the slide there, and it was in your staff report. So starting to talk about implementing the cap, where this actually says 16 months, that's when we presented to the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission. And what I will say is that between the CEJC and the Transportation Commission, your two commissions are tasked with providing input and advice to City Council on cap actions. So this commission is tasked with the transportation-related items, which will probably largely be responding to staff efforts and that kind of thing, as will the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission comment on the building and energy actions and the adaptation and carbon removal actions. What we are doing is really starting to regroup and think, are we on track? We've been developing the soft infrastructure for making us be able to address these cap actions, things like community partnerships, looking for funding and resources, further developing our data, and as I said, regional collaboration. So that's what we've been focused on. And we recognize that when we go back to City Council, we'll be looking for some strong direction on a framework for prioritizing cap actions and determining how to fund cap actions. So as far as the funding and resources, one of the first things that we did was we completed a 3-year cap grant strategy to look at what grants were available and what we could go after. We're looking at some creative opportunities for financing and budgeting, potentially incentives and rebates, that kind of thing. And acknowledging that there is an existing funding and resource gap for cap implementation. So we need to be honest with ourselves about that in order to be really proactive about getting these actions done. And what I can say is that we are looking at integrating the cap actions into departmental work plans and making sure that it's not just one program or a handful of people that are looking at implementing cap actions, but city staff-wide with the support of commissions and council. So one of the things that we've recently done is we had, during the development of the CAP, we had a technical advisory committee that was really kind of a group that helped us review our approach to the CAP, which was a non-Brown Act body. They met, I think, 5 or 6 times, but we also had an implementation team of staff that helped make sure that all of the actions were reasonable and doable, really. And then we had the commissions and the community input. So all of those things were important to get to where we were, where we finished the CAP, and now we have reestablished our internal citywide CAP implementation team to address project level priorities, actions, and budgets. And that's going to be an important group to move forward with implementing CAP actions. Excuse me. We're currently developing our climate dashboard, which will be a progress report on how we're doing with our various actions, and will be both inward facing to support city staff and council and commissions, as well as to support community engagement and share information, so it will also be public facing. At the same time, we're updating our greenhouse gas inventory to a current year. And the purpose of the dashboard is to look at resilience and adaptation, to track the progress on adaptation strategies, overall to manage CAP projects effectively within our city staff team, to address decarbonization efforts by sector, and focus on the largest contributors, energy, transportation, and waste management. And then, of course, to look at the co-benefits. This graph on this page is many of the co-benefits that we were taking a look at, and you can see there are things such as public safety, cost of living reduction, energy resilience, jobs creation, health and well-being, resiliency. So those are all important co-benefits, and each action in the CAP has a chart at the top of the action that says what are the co-benefits that are addressed by this action, along with some cost information and GHG reduction information. Some of the actions that have been progressing quite rapidly are, we did complete our fleet EV transition plan and have that available to staff to work with knowing when to purchase electric vehicles and what charging infrastructure we need to support those vehicles. We also purchased an EV van for Davis Community Transit, and then we've been looking at a number of grant applications. We received money from CCAT for $20,000 for 10 electric vehicle purchase. We've got some funding from SACOG for charging infrastructure. And so we've been looking at ways to help fund many of these actions outside of city general fund or budgets. We've also done some work with energy. On the municipal side, we have transitioned all of our city accounts to UltraGreen, which is 100% renewable. And all of the lighting in municipal facilities have been switched to LEDs. As far as community actions, we are currently working on a program with Yolo County doing a home energy score pilot, which will assess 50 existing single-family residences for their energy efficiency and make recommendations, which the pilot will then give us information as a baseline to move forward with additional energy efficiency for our existing built environment. We're just on the verge of releasing a bid for new level 2 and DC fast chargers. We've installed we've purchased 2 mobile solar chargers. One is installed, the other will be installed shortly. And then transportation staff is working on things that Ryan and Jennifer can talk to you more about, the short-range transit plan, the spin e-bikes and scooters, and we have some other grants that are in progress for cool paving and other options. So the next steps are that we had committed to a 2025 CAP update to reach the 2040 carbon neutrality target. I will say that in our current CAP, when some of our actions were addressed by City Council so that they became voluntary only, it became clear that we were not able to match our 2040 target for carbon neutrality, but we knew that we have some time to get there. So the CAP update will probably address how do we regroup and get to carbon neutrality by 2040 by looking at the actions that we have and either amending them or adding new actions or just kind of get a snapshot of where our progress is. We do want to do an updated vulnerability assessment. That is one of the things that is in the City Council goals. So sustainability and climate action are pretty much integrated into the City Council goals that were adopted last year. And then we will continue community outreach, engagement, and information sharing with the community. So I wanted to open this up for discussion and questions. The images that you see on the screen right now is that we had a 6-month social media outreach campaign when the CAP was first adopted to let people know what is a CAP, what does it include, what can you do, that kind of thing. So these are some of those examples. And that's what I have. I know the staff report has a lot more detail about grants that we have successfully received in recent years and some of the actions that we're working on that are transportation related. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but I did just want to give you a general overview. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. With that, I'll open it up for clarifying questions from commissioners. Are there any clarifying questions at this time? I did have one, I don't know if it's appropriate at this time in terms of clarification, but in looking at on the electrification side of things, is there any portion of it that is looking at requiring charging stations at, major shopping centers and things like that? It seems like that's one area. I know the city's looking at, and this calls for, I think, about 16 charging stations that the city would be putting in. But it seems like we're really lacking them at major shopping areas. There's nothing in West Davis. There's nothing at the Nugget Market area, at Covell or Cowell or Oakshade. And I was just wondering if that was anywhere in the plan to make that a requirement in terms of, land planning or.
One of the things that we're participating in that was mentioned in the staff report is that Yolo County received some funding from the state for a zero emissions vehicle master plan. And that includes the cities in Yolo County, the university, the tribe, UGD, and others. And so we're taking a look at, during that process, which is just starting up now, about how we spread resources out through the community to make for the ability for people to get their cars charged. The difficulty with shopping centers is the public-private difference, and so we haven't really at this point focused on shopping centers. We've been more thinking about if we have additional funds that we might go to apartment complexes or places where we can address the needs of less economically stable, more disadvantaged community members, more vulnerable community members, and we might do some partnerships on that. So right now, what we have focused on is implementing the phase 1 of the SACOG grant that we got. We will probably have additional funds, and then we'll be going back to community members to get input on how to use those additional funds. And we're constantly looking at other grants and other resources. There are different resources for commercial businesses that they can use to get charging in their shopping areas. I know, for example, this isn't exactly the same thing, but the Kaiser parking lot has EV chargers. There are EV chargers in other locations. And so, yes, we would like to take a look at that, but I think to date we have focused on city-owned properties for what we're doing right now.
And I have one other question, it's a little more specific. How is the mobile solar charger used, and what's the purpose of that?
The mobile solar charger that we have installed right now is at what used to be called the Boy Scout lot on First Street. It is, because it's mobile, it can be put in different locations. Right now it's somewhat, not permanently, but we have it at that location. It is really used for when you don't have the ability to hook up to the power grid. So you can have, while the mobile solar chargers are somewhat expensive, it's not the same cost for an area where you are not able to hook into a transformer or the power grid. So for example, if the community had a community event that was in a more remote location, it's pretty easy to move and take those mobile solar chargers there. It was part of our grant application that we would incorporate mobile solar chargers. All of these elements, the level 2, the DC fast, the mobile solar chargers, and the van were part of our grant application, which was done as a collaborative grant with some of our partner agencies right in the region.
Thank you.
A quick clarifying question. You mentioned the transition, I think, city finances to a different, to ultra green or ultra clean.
Yes.
Can you provide 2 more lines of information? Just I'm curious to know what that entails and how many dollars were moved into funds and what are they no longer funding?
I'm not the expert on this. The city has quite a few accounts that were moved over to Valley Clean Energy already. They were at the standard clean rate. The differential between standard clean and ultra green for city accounts is not exorbitant, and so it was just a matter of getting those switched over. There were a few accounts that were with other providers that were not possible to switch over, so every account that is possible to switch has been switched. And the basic opportunity for that is to go from about a 70% renewable energy procurement to 100% procurement. And Valley Clean Energy is projecting that they will be getting to 100% renewable energy within the next 2 to 3 years in any case. So it's just the city making a commitment to use green energy as much as possible.
Thanks, that's clear now. I, for a second, thought you meant that city finances also were divesting from certain pools of...
No.
Yeah, so thanks for the clarification, it helps.
Maybe you can clarify, I think I understood based upon my colleague's question. So there hasn't been discussion about requiring new developments to provide on-site solar charging through the use of ordinances? So you were talking about using city funds, but new apartments, new housing developments.
Well, the previous question, I believe, was about the EV charging, and your question is about
EV charging stations.
off-site. I am not aware of any situations where we have required developers to do off-site EV charging. We do require EV charging within their community,
Okay,
as well
that's what
as
I
solar
meant.
charging.
So, yeah, so if a new apartment complex or new housing development, there would be requirements for
Yes,
EV charging.
yes, yes.
Thank you.
We originally had, it might have even been when you were on council in 2017, when we approved the EV charging master plan that required an increased amount of EV chargers in new development. But at this point, Cal Green has caught up with that, so every project that comes to the city of Davis needs to meet Cal Green requirements. And so that's the standard that we work with right now.
Thank you.
Clarifying question, for tracking, for the purposes of tracking like emissions associated with the cities, like for transportation purposes, is that just looking at trips that like are within or start and end, like just within Davis, or trips that start or end in Davis, or also trips that like pass through Davis, be they like on the highway, or also like people that get off and might cut through on city streets to get around traffic and then get back on. So I'm just curious, like, which, if any or all of those trips count towards that?
Yes, yes, no, and yes. So any trip that either starts or ends in Davis or stays within Davis is counted. The trips that only have one destination or origin in Davis, half of the greenhouse gases are counted. If someone gets off the freeway and drives through Davis streets and then gets back on the freeway, they would be an internal city of Davis trip, so that would be counted. However, if they drive past Davis on I-80 and never get off, even though they're going through Davis proper, that is not counted. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
We worked with Fair and Piers. We had the greenhouse gas inventory before we started the CAP, and then Fair and Piers helped us develop additional transportation data that was more applicable to developing our CAP actions. So they did an origin destination analysis. They looked at streetlight data, which helps look at where people are traveling and how they're traveling. And so when we do our updated greenhouse gas inventory, we need to figure out which of those resources we will be able to use again to get a really good picture of what transportation is happening in Davis. And as you are probably aware, transportation is over 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And those emissions can be very difficult to address with city policies, because you can't force someone to get on their bike or to get on a bus. But we're trying to do things that make those options more palatable, to have incentives, to work with community partners to help people make those choices.
Thank you. Are there other clarifying questions?
Yeah, I have a very broad question. So you mentioned there's a funding gap for CAP implementation. I'm just wondering if you can comment on the scale of that, or?
I don't have hard and fast numbers. We did do some analysis of costs for CAP implementation action by action. Many of the actions in the CAP require outreach and programs for community members. And one of the things that is identified in the CAP is to assess what those costs would be for the city to do those programs. When I say funding and resource gap right now, we don't have a lump sum of money that is dedicated toward CAP implementation. We have some funds that have been earmarked for doing that, but we really need to come up with some parameters for the guidelines for how we use those funds. But we're talking more in the neighborhood right now of $500,000, not multiple millions of dollars, which is what it would take to truly reach carbon neutrality by 2040. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps.
And I think that's one of the things that we want to get more clearly identified in the 2025 update. So when we finished the CAP, our direction and our purpose was to go after grant funds. That can be rewarding, but it's time consuming, and you don't necessarily get exactly the funds for exactly the purpose that you want. So we do need to address how to fund climate actions to meet our goals. And we're not alone. Many local governments are in the same boat, where the development of the CAP was pretty well identified how you're going to get to adoption. And then after adoption, the framework for how to implement the actions is less structured.
Just as one follow-up, I guess, in terms of transportation things, are there any kind of obvious, kind of challenging things funding-wise, like it'll be?
I pass that to Brian and Jennifer.
I think there's a lot of funding challenges when we look at some of the CAP implementation. Building out an electric vehicle charging network could be very expensive. One that I keep on looking at and coming back to is reduced cost of free bus transit service. Currently, there's a variety of funding sources for transit, and you'd probably be looking at needing additional funding somewhere in the $5 to $10 million a year in order to offset kind of fare box recovery and then some of those funds that the students are paying into Unitransit when we get to that one.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, if there's no other questions from commissioners, we'll open this up to public comment. If you have a public comment, please come up here to the podium, state your name, and you will have 3 minutes for public comment.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gary Sampler, and I'm a relatively recent immigrant into Davis. And I just wanted to mention that as you think about getting people more onto bicycles, I hope that you'll also look at the safety of the bike lane system here in Davis. There are plenty of sections of the bike lanes where the drivers routinely drive into the bike lanes in order to get around obstacles in the road or to get around the way the manhole covers are done, such as on Fifth Street. And so in order to help get people onto their bikes and get them onto the roads, you kind of need to make sure that the infrastructure there is really ready for that. So, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have any other public comment on this item? Okay. With that, I will close public comment and open it up to discussion from commissioners for additional feedback on the report. Any? Brett?
Yeah, sure. I wasn't thinking I would go first, but a couple of things. Just a couple of very minor ones. One of the things that I've noticed about the charging stations here at City Hall and in other places, and it's been a minor pet peeve, Davis being a small town, many of the people making use of the charging stations have charging stations at their own homes, and they make use of the charging infrastructure because it's free. And with the limited availability of charging stations, I think some other communities have charged a modest amount, a small amount, to tilt the convenience scale towards, well, I'll just stay at home rather than saving 30 cents a kilowatt by charging up my car for free at City Hall. So I think that's probably come up before, not participating in some of the discussions. My guess is it probably has, but in case it hadn't. As far as the free transit idea, I know that there have been examples where municipalities, pre-COVID, have tried the free transit and actually it reduced ridership counterintuitively. I think from my perspective as somebody who takes the bus occasionally, I think having a more robust schedule and also better connectivity. For instance, if we right now, it's not that late, 7 o'clock, want to take public transit between here and Dixon, yeah, good luck. You can look it up on Google Maps and you kind of can't get there, right? And so expanding the network, improving the frequency might actually yield greater results in terms of transportation ridership. My guess is, you have Andy here as our in-house transit expert. That's probably been discussed before, but just in case, I thought I would bring it up. The biggest issue that I have is historically we've thought about greenhouse gas emissions in terms of the aggregate level, and that has been used against the city in the sense of, I think, a more and often a per capita measure. And I know per capita information is available, but for instance, if we were to imagine there's 10 students who are commuting from Placerville to Davis 4 days a week, and we build a little mini apartment complex for them, and they now just walk to campus. Our greenhouse gas emissions have gone up. And Davis is a wonderful place. We're a small little town though. The key to our efforts are, in the bigger picture, the regional. And so where this has been used against us, for instance, is, there's a housing development. It's going to make our greenhouse gas goals even harder to hit. It's going to, it just pushes the finish line that much further away. And in fairness to staff and the Climate Adaptation and Action Plan, there is the per capita aspect, but I would say that's the secondary kind of metric that's emphasized. If we all kind of knew what our current kind of average was, and by bringing these folks, in terms of us in Davis, but also the regional, when people, UC Davis students or staff, are able to live in Davis and they're not commuting from Roseville or Placerville or Natomas, this would be a net benefit for the region. It may not be, when we use the very narrow lens, a net benefit for Davis and its specific aggregate greenhouse gas inventory. But that was just something I've noticed in the past where some good and some bad projects have been opposed just based upon this aggregate metric. And I think a greater emphasis on the per capita of the region, where we are in relation to the region and how our actions could actually lower the regional per capita figure. Anyway, that was pretty much it. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you. First, congratulations on having our initial stab at how we've done since the adaptation. I know there's a lot of work has gone into getting this to the finish line back in April 2023, and it's good to see that we're continuing to try and make this happen. It's also obvious that we have challenges that are not insignificant ahead of us, and you've highlighted some of them. Most of them come back to funding. I have a fair number of comments and some advice, but I wanted to definitely start by acknowledging the fact that we are, as a city, and as far as we can, trying to move towards where we know we need to go. It seems inappropriate to not mention to this committee, even though it's transportation, the lion's share of our community's emissions are in our wheelhouse, and how we do or don't do in this area is really going to dictate whether or not we, as a community, are going to meet that goal of carbon neutrality 2040. Everybody is trying this, and everybody's finding out that first 10-20% reductions are easy, and then it becomes progressively harder. And I mean, I'll call your attention to the 2024 GreenNext. It's called the California Green Innovation Index report that the state just put out last month. Where we celebrated that we met our 2020 goal. 2020 goals like 4 years early. But we're also projected to miss our 2035 and our 2045 goals, not by a small margin. We're way off where we need to be. And that's because this is hard. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy. And the easy pickings have been had. We need to really not underestimate that in order for us to have a fighting chance of meeting our emission reduction goals everywhere, and the ones in Davis are the ones under our purview, so that's what we're focusing on, is going to require some radical rethinking as to how we do this, not some shifts around the margins. And I know we all know this. I think it's good to kind of frame this discussion that we're doing something that is going to be very hard to do, and if we don't do it, all we have to do is look at Los Angeles, and that's going to be what's happening. That is what's going to be happening in the next decades. The question is, how much worse does it get? It really is. Those are the stakes, and some people might not experience that and might therefore not feel or buy into, can we do the same things that we like to do in a way that is fundamentally better for everybody? But that's the challenge ahead. That's a hard one. Okay. So with that being said, it's interesting how even in this forum, the discussion quickly pivots to charging and electric vehicles. And I actually much appreciate the comments on where we charge and who gets to reap the benefits. There's an equity concern there that I fully agree with and we should be addressing. I love placing charging infrastructure maybe at rental communities, maybe in partnership with UC Davis, where the same discussions I know have been coming up on the campus side of the climate planning. But it's also interesting how some of the discussion around how to do transportation better seems to really have a hard time moving beyond imagining transportation by car. We are habitually reflexing to envisioning how to do transportation by replacing an internal combustion engine with an EV drivetrain. And cars are sometimes necessary. They're actually not that bad to drive. I have one, I own one, I pay my taxes for it. But they are also, in some ways, a really imperfect tool for the job. For example, driving a short distance and parking it somewhere where nobody parks anywhere and actually pays anything. The city is charged to maintain it. People expect the city to do it and blame the city if it's not spick and span or readily available when they need it. And that is a model that needs to change. I think we all know that, part of that already. But again, here we talk about how it's the speed with which we can adopt charging infrastructure as somehow becoming the limit in how fast we can move. And in that context, I'll just challenge us to think about how 5 years ago we had bikes and that was it. Now we have all kinds of mobility, which is sometimes maligned. You can wonder why people are like to malign them, but they also are much less heavy. They don't do nearly the wear and tear to a city street that we all like to complain about. They are also plug and play. They don't require any special infrastructure, no special grants required to try and build up infrastructure. And like most cars, they charge at home and they are just a lot easier. There are the climate solution that is right here, right now, and they're not fit for everything. But unless if we want to meet these goals that we have in front of us, that I think, mostly agree on that we need to meet, that really needs to be the center point of it. There is not a way that cities who've done transportation well have done so by sticking to 4,000-pound single occupancy metal boxes. And I know that the people in this room probably all acknowledge that, or at least it's something that resonates with them. Getting the council and getting the public to really get behind that is going to require maybe a better communication strategy than pointing at that these generic fast facts that we point to in our communication strategy that are just, they don't tell Davisites what it means for them and what they should be doing and where the lowest hanging fruits are. So if we agree, I hope we do, that it's the bike in all its incarnations that is really the climate solution that is probably at hand here, then we should also focus our education and outreach more on that and tout the co-benefits, not approach it from how can we get people to actually get on that thing. Like talk about the health benefits, talk about the lack of pollution, talk about, there's a reason why people in Northwestern Europe live longer, healthier, and it's not just because they have single-payer healthcare, it's also because they are just much more active for much of their lives. And these are benefits that are real benefits. There's social benefits, and there's climate benefits, there's pollution benefits. So that's where the discussion needs to go. I'll scroll through and make some comments. Jennifer, I reached out to Jennifer today with a question on whether we know what the historical fleet was over time. I may not have given you nearly enough time to give you an answer, that's fair. I know that city staff uses e-bikes, but I haven't heard them mention those. So as we're talking about fleet and how we power our fleet, I know that there's cars that aren't necessary for many things the city does, but has the city fleet actually shifted itself in its modality? And if so, we should use that, because I know that the traffic engineers get around on e-bikes sometimes to go inspect, and it's appropriate. And that is an example of how what maybe used to have been a car trip is now an e-bike trip. And we do it already, so we might as well also actually just show and tell. Because I can get from my home in West Davis to downtown in 8 or 9 minutes by an e-bike, and my car doesn't get me there any faster, right? And this is then true for most of the range of Davis. Related to that, we talk about bikes as first mile, last mile. That's jargon, I know where it's coming from. I would maybe venture to educate a city council that it's no longer a mile, it's more like 3 miles, and that's 52% of all trips taken by Americans is under 3 miles. So by getting in the mind of people that fully half of all trips that Americans take everywhere is within that 3 mile range, which is now an easy range that you can take by any e-assist vehicle, probably it needs to be said and it needs to be educated. We need to educate people around this. This doesn't mean that if you do a heavy load of, hardware at your hardware store, that you can just do that on your bike. But most of the time people take trips, they take these trips by themselves in a vehicle. Well, there's really no reason why they should habitually do that. And they probably don't. They probably will learn to value the benefits of getting out of that mode. It's not just, it is actually a benefit, and people will probably experience it that way. So there is that. There is a topic, an important one, outreach to vulnerable and marginalized groups. I was wondering if the city, and if not, we probably want to consider doing that. The city has been able to identify residents in Davis who are eligible for the e-bike rebates that the state makes available. It's income-based. They're limited, they're capped at 1,500 per tranche. The first tranche went out late December. We missed that, that's fine, but we should definitely try and make sure that those folks who might benefit from and are eligible for know how to navigate the process so we can help them adopt the type of transportation that we want. Organizations like Save I Do This, all we have to do is kind of piggyback onto their existing outreach, and we might be able to have some success there. And then the communication at the end, again, we can, for example, inform our community that, did you know that maybe almost 1% of organized gas emissions is just tied up by driving kids to schools in cars? That's probably something that people would know. But did you know that those potholes that you worry about are mostly caused by heavier and heavier cars? Those may be opportunities for us to connect the co-benefits of making the right choices to the things that people love to complain to the city about, and that the city is cash-strapped to try and rectify, and hopefully try to adopt or create some adoption of the types of behaviors that we want and have the co-benefits that we know that they have. So maybe we can look at that communication strategy and redirect it at things that actually resonate. We know because they complain to our neighbors. Now, I might have things more, but I'll leave it at this for now.
Thank you. Andy?
Thank you. I also wanted to touch on, like a few key areas here. The first, following up on my point on my question on cut-through traffic that I had earlier. I'm really happy to hear that that is part of what's being measured to track emissions as opposed to just trips like start or end in Davis. That's good to hear, since our city, I feel like, does have a key role and a key role and a lot of potential to address that. And to that end, I think something for staff to focus on is just making sure that, like, projects, like we've talked about, there's still the planned later phase of the MACE project that would have like some sort of metering signal south of town, but looking to develop a program or project to address the cut-through traffic issue, because that's something that can have a tremendous impact on the VMT in reducing emissions, and especially given that our friends at Caltrans District 3 are dead set on building an additional lane on the highway, but which we have limited control over that. But what we can do, by addressing the cut-through traffic, where we have like county roads and city streets that are functioning as like a fourth, even like fifth and sixth lane, I-80 lane at times, by attaching like a program or project to address the cut-through traffic to this plan we can do a big part in mitigating some of the impacts of that project. So that's one area. Also touching on free fares, the free fares issue. Commissioner Lee had some great points earlier just about how, of course, with operating funds finite, there's a lot of evidence that the biggest gains in ridership, and especially modal shift from driving, comes from using operating funds to expand service rather than just by making the fares free. And that's because even when free fares do increase ridership, a lot of the time that will be just like, oh, someone's walking down the street, they see the buses coming, because it's free, they'll go down and go a couple of stops, versus it being that kind of broader modal shift that expanded service can facilitate. That said, I think because there is still some potential on the fare side here in town, because Unitrans just has a unique operating and financial structure, where we already have like a really stable source with the student tuition fee that gives a huge percentage of the Unitrans riders, but essentially they do pay the fee behind the scenes, but then when they're getting on that bus every day, they get essentially that fare-free experience where you don't have to have cash on hand or tap a card or worry about paying on the margins every single time. And then also, of course, with the under 18s, with the low carbon transit operations program subsidy for their fares, as well as seniors, a huge percentage of Unitrans riders are already getting that fare-free experience with existing and stable sources. And I think, especially given that I think those stable sources have put Unitrans in a great position to come in. There still have been challenges with driver shortages and whatnot. In general, Unitrans is in a great position to come back from COVID relative to other transit agencies around the state and around the country. And now, and especially with the administration that let COVID happen coming back in, when we should be keeping those stable sources rather than looking to replace those. But instead, the key should be like looking, since there still is that remaining portion of riders that do have to pay fares up front. So potentially, there could be ways to fill that relatively small gap in an inexpensive way that could make a difference in the transit culture. It seems like the main challenge to that, based on past discussions that we have here, is just that if it just was made free for everyone, that could lead to some frustration among students because they feel that others are just freeloading on them. So I'd ask staff to look at like politically feasible funding options for students for filling that gap, or students wouldn't feel like they're like others are freeloading on them, and some sort of similar structure, or others would still be paying their share, but not where they're having to worry about like hassling with an app with some sort of customized app or cash every time they have to get out of the bus. And one option for that, it could be again some sort of tax structure or something like that. But also it could be even if people do have to pay up front, again, it could be good to look at like just credit card tap to pay fares. That like the Cal ITP, a program that I know they have now on Capital Corridor or the SAC-RT light rail, as opposed to again like the customized apps or cash that people have to deal with today. So that's the free fares area, and then the last area that I wanted to highlight is the regional transit issue. And one thing I'd be curious to know more about is like what sort of focus there, because that's something again Davis does not. We don't have complete control over the regional transit issues, since these are bigger agencies like YOLO TD or Capital Corridor or SACOG, but we do have representation on the boards of those agencies. So one of our biggest roles would seem to be making sure that those board members are really our voices for riders in those conversations, and also voting in a way that reflects transit needs, that reflects transit riders' needs. Of course, like at the YOLO TD level, when we have these these issues that seem like they should be relatively easy to solve. Like I mentioned, the Woodland Transit Center issue earlier. Like in downtown Sacramento, every time there's an event at Golden One Center, when the bus system is thrown into chaos, and that's something that has a huge impact on people in Davis trying to get other places, and arguably will discourage people from trying transit and driving instead. When if the bus service were just stable and went to the right places in those other communities, it would be a much more appealing option than it is. And then also, of course, as Commissioner Lee mentioned, like the Winters Dixon-Vacaville issue, where it's been kind of a Bermuda Triangle for transit recently, where since 2020, service was never great to those locations, but what there was has practically disappeared in the last 5 years. So that's another issue that women right now are really depending on our YOLO TD board member to address that. And then similarly, like at the SACOG, and of course that's where we can have a key role in that unmet needs determination, that the region were to acknowledge that there are unmet transit needs. That right there directs more operating funding to transit, as well as just making sure that transit and these regional issues are highlighted in future regional transportation plans. And then a couple other organizations to look at Davis representation is Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, which is the new authority that was recently created for I-80, as well as Capital Corridor, of course. And there's so much potential with shifting more trips to the train, and that's somewhere where through YOLO TD, our city does have representation on those boards as well. And especially with Capital Corridor, because if you saw the state rail plan, which came out recently, that has a quite ambitious vision for not just its increased frequency and actual overhead electrification of the Capital Corridor line, but also in addition to the intercity trains, having a regional rail line connecting Davis to downtown Sacramento and Roseville. And I'd never seen a formal proposal like that, a formal proposal for something like that. So that's something I think to be excited about, and to look for ways to accelerate and move up to the extent feasible.
Great, thank you. Any other comments from commissioners?
Yeah, so I'll just weigh in on the fare-free transit issue as well, that kind of like the other commissioners here, I kind of weigh in more on the side of that being down the priority list a bit, like improving the service kind of being the number one thing that's gonna make a difference, especially in this climate context. That would be where I stand on that issue. And then another thing I'll just point out is one of the sections here in the transportation section, reduce single occupant vehicle use, kind of was touched on earlier by Mark. See if we can get those programs going soon would be something that I'd be excited to see. So like the things that are listed on the sheet here, downtown parking improvements, transportation demand management program, and low emissions vehicle program. So those would all be things that I'd be interested in seeing at some point. And yeah.
Great, all right, thank you. Brett?
Yeah, just kind of a minor follow-up comments, and this relates to the public commenter as well. I think, our commission often evaluates and provides feedback on some of the projects that Ryan has brought before us, that he, are ambitious, appealing projects that he designs and reaches out to grant funding agencies to fund. I think it would be nice for us to think about some of the lower cost solutions that may not be kind of shiny objects that outside entities will want to provide grant funding to, but I think increase the desirability and the level of comfort and sense of safety for people cycling. So for instance, if we are to redo an intersection, let's call that $2 to $3 million. Yet, I think for many of us, having the stripes on the street relatively bright and recent as opposed to faded, so in the evening or when it rains, suddenly the lanes all disappear. Slightly improved street lighting, so when it comes time to replace, or maybe not even time to replace, but in certain areas, improved brightness of lights. Just some basic things, because I think fundamentally, if something is desirable, people will want to do it. And there's some minor obstacles that I think are relatively inexpensive to make cycling more attractive, more appealing. I know that Ryan is working with the downtown on, and Jennifer, in improved and increased quantity of bike parking downtown, right? And hopefully in well-lit areas, so you don't have to worry that, you come back after being, eating dinner and your bike looks like, Mad Max Road Warrior has shown up and, eaten your bicycle or something. But just some basic lower cost things that can be done. That isn't to say we don't do the other things, because there are grant funding agencies that do like to see Davis pushing the ball forward and improve design concepts. But it might be something for us to think about, low cost, high impact solutions. But thank you.
Thank you. I just kind of follow up on that too. I think it's a great point about investing in maintaining our existing bicycle infrastructure is really important, because the places where we've made significant improvements, like you said, just even in striping, things like that, definitely sends the message that these are, much more viable for people to use as a transportation mode. There's plenty of places around town right now where you don't feel that, because the bike lanes are all but missing because of faded striping or poor signage or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a really important point, that the more that we can do, and just even those less sexy areas of just maintaining what we have really does help to improve people's I think interest in using those facilities. So, are there any other comments from commissioners? Yes, Mark?
I'll have a couple, hopefully quick follow-ups. When you hear people advocate for long-term what we want to go in terms of having the physically protected infrastructure that I think ultimately makes business successful. There is a phase where you go through like one intersection at a time, sometimes doing the easy and affordable things first with a plan to get where you know you want to go, while that, with the acknowledgement that takes resources and more time. There are a whole number of low-hanging fruit, cost-effective, small adaptations that will make cycling a whole lot safer. For example, prioritizing cyclists and not having them wait in the middle of 2 lanes of traffic or vehicles on both sides requires what I think should be simple adjustments of existing timing on traffic lights. That becomes a bandwidth issue on the city side, how we make this happen. But these are not capital investment changes. And I can tell you, biking through the city with a couple of native Dutch people who see like, all the little things like that will make the experience a whole lot safer and therefore more desirable. There is a lot we can do that doesn't need to cost an arm and a leg right away while we are planning for the longer term thing. The other thing I'll point out, and I don't know, there's 2 more things I'll point out. One of them is we talked about the Fifth Street Corridor 2 meetings now. I wasn't there for the last one. But if I recall that Fifth Street Corridor discussion, there was a traffic analysis done before and after. The before was, I think, 12,000 vehicles per day, and the after was 12,000 vehicles a day. And to some degree, you might view that and say, well, this is great, we haven't impeded cars. The flip side is, we still haven't gotten that number of 12,000 vehicles managing occupancy down. So that begs the question, okay, what is missing? And part of what's missing is probably this continuity and safety, not just on one stretch, but of all the stretches, because, right? So I think there's 2 ways of looking at the data like that. Like, okay, well, we built some of it, it is better than it was before, why don't they come? And that's probably a longer discussion than we have time for today, but to me, I think that should be the discussion. Okay, well, this is good, it's better than it was before, and yet it is also not yet doing it by itself what we wanted to do. So viewing both, celebrating both successes and acknowledging where we need to go is what I think that kind of, how we want to view the outcomes of projects like that. The other thing, and this is a follow-up on Commissioner Lee, I've often wondered, we are looking at Palomino Place, Village Farms, if they're going to come for the ballot, there's going to be discussion, there's going to be pros and cons, people are going to be for and against. We need the housing for all the right reasons, because that's probably one of the best greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that we can do, but at the same time, I've asked, and I don't think there has ever been clarity or attention paid to who do we build for. And it's hard to predict or to say, well, we're going to build for so-and-so, not so-and-so. But it would be very helpful to acknowledge, letting go of the data-specific goals, but to assess regional greenhouse gas emission impacts. If we knew who we are hoping or thinking or planning to attract, is this now allowing people who commute to Davis for work to live in Davis and therefore greatly reduce our impact? Or are we going to become a sleeper community to the East Bay, in which case, well, that begs the question, do we want to do that as Davis, given that we have a greenhouse gas emission reduction goal to have? And it would be at least honest to have that discussion when it comes to the discussion that is on the ballot going to be for the next set of developments that are going to go to the voter. And I think the voter will have questions on this, and I think we should provide them, and as much as we can, our best sense as to who we think might be the new people who we hope to attract here. From a tax perspective, from an affordable housing perspective, from a commute perspective. And I've not seen it happen in the past, and I think maybe that's the kind of metric we want to add to the discussions as we're asking Davis on their approval to build the housing that we see. So that's it.
Thank you. There's no other comments from commissioners. Carrie, I hope this was helpful feedback for all this, and thank you very much for the presentation this evening, and thank you for spending your last couple of days at the city here with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. I do have a couple responses if you'd like to hear to some of your points, and I hope I caught most of them. Oh, sorry, mic wasn't on. I wanted to emphasize that the purpose of being here is really the introduction to the CAP, so that you have kind of the basic knowledge of the CAP in the event that City Council asks you for input on something specific, but to really understand the actions in the CAP or even more information in the CAP, I think you need to dive a little deeper because this was just an overview. So I just wanted to make that point, that I wasn't trying to talk about each of the transportation actions, but I think you have a lot of really good ideas about many of these actions, and so taking a look at the CAP and especially the implementation roadmaps at the back for the transportation actions, maybe you would agree or disagree with some of those actions that are in there. So, and how to get to that particular element. The CAP is not the only document. It is one document that really focuses on greenhouse gas reduction and addressing climate risk. And there are other documents that the city has or will develop, like the Beyond Platinum Bicycle Plan or other ones that address things that are in the CAP, but also some of the things that you brought up that are not in the CAP. So all of these planning documents work together to provide the guidance for what the city wants to do. As far as EV charging stations, the existing ones that we have are free. There are a handful of them. The idea was to install higher-end smart chargers that will allow us to require a fee for use and collect data. And so all of the new chargers that will be going in will be smart chargers, and there will be a fee. And at some point, we'll have to go to the Finance Commission to discuss how to set those fees. But we're still just about to release that bid package for installing those level 2 and DC fast chargers. I've been really fascinated by your discussion of the fare-free transit and other components of transit. I did want to point out that there are 2 transit actions. The first one is really about transit in Davis, and it not only says fare-free transit, but it also says expand service areas, and so those 2 things are both in there. I will say that this somewhat came out of the workshop that we had that was really focused on equity and inclusion, and people that were at that workshop felt very strongly that in order to get to their jobs or to use services in town for their children to get to school or various things, that was an important component that would make a big difference for them. We also at that time had staff that was really supportive of the idea of at least looking into fare-free transit. But it is complicated, and it may not be the top priority. So that's why each action needs more work before we get to where we actually implement it. The other transit action is really about regional interconnectivity. The electric vehicles, out of the 11 transportation actions, electric vehicles are 2 of the actions, so it's not the highest value approach that we want to talk about, but it does tend to get a lot of focus because of who pays attention to these things, and people that want to buy their Tesla or whatever are very focused on everybody should be driving EVs, but it isn't the biggest focus of the CAP. It is a component that we want to address. As far as fleet, we did not have too many electric vehicles prior to this because we didn't have the EV charging infrastructure that was available to fleet. So it was kind of on hold, but there wasn't much action happening. And now that we have the fleet transition plan that looks at all 158 of our city vehicles and how they could be transitioned to electric vehicles and what the charging infrastructure would need to be and where it would be located, we now have the outline of what we need to do. And staff can work with the they can make different scenarios and look at different components about, well, if we bought this many vehicles in this year, then how would that impact the next year? And that kind of thing. As far as first mile, last mile, I think that the reason that that action is important is because the Fair and Piers analysis of Davis trips was kind of astounding to me, but basically they said that 95% of trips either start outside of Davis or end outside of Davis. So that's where we really need to be looking at if we're gonna get someone to get out of their car to come to Davis on the Capitol Corridor or some other way, once they get here, what are they going to do? And some community members have then said, well, then it doesn't matter what we do inside of Davis, which is not the other side of that equation. It is also important to get more people on bikes, more people on transit and that kind of thing. But we do have a somewhat unusual set of data for transportation in Davis because of having the university and some of our other situations that cause for a lot of origin destination trips that are that start or end outside of Davis. I don't know what else I really wanted to address. I was interested to read in the news recently that New York City is the first US city that has congestion pricing. That's one of our actions. There's a lot of wondering, is it even possible in Davis? But if there's only been one and it's a very large city, is that possible? But it also, it does make a big difference. So again, I guess the takeaway is that each of these actions needs to be addressed more fully before we're ready to completely implement the action. But these were the things that were of interest to the community at the time that we developed the CAP and were supported by staff and had the highest value for greenhouse gas reductions. So I know you brought up a lot of other really important points, but those are the ones that I wanted to kind of clarify a bit.
Great, thank you again. With that, we will now move on to the long-range calendar. Jennifer, can you provide an overview of the calendar for us, please?
Thank you, Carrie. So in February, we have an introduction of our Safe Routes to School program. Our coordinator will be coming in and providing, you will meet her, and then she will also be providing the pathway forward for the fall of the school year. Annual speed hump survey, Ryan's working on an annual speed hump survey. And then we have a traffic study guidelines for development projects. In March, we plan on bringing Anderson Road 30% design, an update on our existing grants, and then the Village Farms project. That's it.
Are there any clarifying questions on the long-range calendar right now? Commissioners? Okay, would any member of the public like to provide comments on the long-range calendar? Okay, if not, then if there's any commission discussion regarding the long-range calendar or other items, Mark?
Yeah, I request that we add to the long-range calendar a topic that is more fully looking at safety around schools. Beyond listening and talking with Lindsay at the next meeting, which is really wonderful. I met her, she's great. I've observed too many near misses at just the one traffic elementary school that I frequent with my kids. I think there is a larger discussion on how we can do better because what I see is I worry there's an accident waiting to happen. I've seen 5 people running late, almost hitting kids at just one intersection at one school, and I'm convinced this is not limited to the one school that I happen to have sent my kids to. So I would like to have a item added to how we can do better. This involves the city, this involves the police department, this should involve the school. For context, I do listen into Matt Best, Superintendent Best's monthly reports, and there was a topic about school safety in schools, and there's many aspects to that. but traffic safety is not on that radar. And it should be, so.
So, in the context of how we've redone establishing our goals, and those goals being in concurrence with the city council, if we want to add this type of an item, is this something that we should have an ad hoc subcommittee on to develop something? Is this something that needs to be discussed with our council liaison? How do we move forward on something like this?
I believe it is something that we would have to request council that we take it up as an agenda item. And I think the direction would be to staff to kind of format that request.
Okay. And Mark and I discussed this a little bit. I mean, obviously, this is kind of a complicated issue. I mean, I know there's some efforts have been going on already. Obviously, the Anderson Road one is related to school safety. The 14th Street project is related to school safety. And then we have the Safe Routes to School. There's also a lot of issues, I think, regarding just general driver attitudes and things around schools, and more of a driver education issue. So I mean, there's a lot of moving parts on something like this.
I think we're still able to do informational updates. I could provide an informational update on the city and the district's efforts and kind of how we've been approaching school safety over the last couple of years, specifically related to traffic and pickup and drop off.
Okay. Is it possible then to put something on our long-range calendar that would be an update on what our existing efforts have been, and then is this something that we could then move on to see if the council, if we can take this up as a agenda item in concurrence with the council?
So I'm hearing you want to concurrently agendize this as an informational item and request that council have the Transportation Commission take it up?
Maybe we take it in steps here. Okay. So let's do it as an informational item first, and then we can discuss what next steps would be after that. Mark, does that?
Can I ask a clarifying question on process here? Because
Absolutely.
I have, actually, the city has been coming up making improvements to some sites, not to the particular issue that I'm talking about here. I think what is needed here is a discussion beyond that, and asking for the city to, for example, I know that other municipalities in California that have actually, within the existing California vehicle code, been able to reduce speeds around schools more than we have. And when I talk to Safe Street advocates in different parts of Northern California, they express some surprise that Davis, of all places, hasn't actually fully explored what they can do. I understand that, and I know some of the constraints that we have in being able to change, for example, speeds, but one of the main arguments seems to be, well, we can't reduce speeds, because if we can't reduce speeds, we can't enforce, but we're not enforcing anyway. I'll take the speed reduction that most people will give over the fact that we can't make a ticket stick on the occasion we actually might enforce. And there's different ways to enforcing than with a person, which is an inequitable and expensive way of doing that. So rather than having just an educational or informational, I think I would like to see this move to a discussion to explore what we actually can do about the issue at hand, despite the fact that police department, city, all will know the barriers that they're facing, but all of us pointing at the barriers that we have is actually not making the situation meaningfully better.
Commissioner Lee, some insight?
Yeah, so I would suggest that we agendize, I'm going to kind of thread the needle here, agendize a discussion for a council request for having this item discussed by us, and this is agendized right now, so we can't kind of do too much back and forth. I would suggest that, and then potentially we request some resources for the discussion, because unfortunately what I've experienced in the past is there's often sort of this fact-free zone discussion where it's about emotion and kind of anecdotal, like I was there and I saw a kid almost get run over. There is expertise, and Jennifer and I, we went to Holland and we had met with traffic engineers, observed some school sites, and there are some best practices in the Netherlands which may apply here. And what was interesting is when Cesar Chavez was going through the remodel, Brian Abnett at the time, one of the city's transportation people, we met, and the different school superintendent, different set of elected officials on the school side, we met and we kind of talked about some of these ways of not having the center, the Rockstar zone, be for car parking. Because by shifting it, it could create some additional safety for the pedestrians and cyclists coming and going. And I'm sorry, it's not agenda, so we can't have back and forth discussion. But anyway, there seemed to be some best practices available, and yet there wasn't really an appetite to really consider anything from, well, we always do it this way, and we want to do it this way. And that's why I say that perhaps we would get ultimately further along if we agendized what we would like to have around that discussion, and if it costs $1,000 to have somebody zoom in with some actual expertise around improved designs, I think we would get more out of it than if we just anecdotally kind of do the fact-free emotion zone where we're like, oh, this is scary, let's do this, and we don't have the context, we don't have the expertise. And in an extremely long-winded way, I apologize. 5 minutes to set up maybe a time-limited 10-minute item so we fine-tune what the request of council is. I think the informational update that Ryan has offered would be valuable, having said that, to move forward, and especially with these opportunities on the horizon, spending a few $1,000s on these close to $1 million projects, 14th Street, Anderson Road, it would be money well spent. There's a real, my experience has been, there's a real value on the front end to have that expertise help kind of set the stage for us. Anyway, I apologize for the 5-minute ramble, but that would be my suggestion.
So Ryan, what can we do here?
I think we can do what Brett's requesting. I'm hearing informational item. I can bring some information. I can talk about the vehicle code and where we can reduce speed limits in front of schools. Kind of discuss what our activities have been to date. And then we can have larger discussion about getting this agendized for more detailed conversation. And that sounds like figuring out who you would want in the meeting as far as your subject matter experts.
Mark, yeah, I think that seems like a reasonable approach. So if we could please add that to the calendar, and then so we can start moving on it. Okay, any other discussion on long-range items?
One other request for an informational item would be just an update on what I mentioned earlier, just the MACE, the later phase of the MACE project with the metering signals, where that's at.
Will do.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. With that then, I'll ask if there's a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So,
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much for all your input and discussion.